AITAH for considering divorcing my wife because she told my sister's husband that my sister cheated on him. You know, I never imagined I'd be here, feeling this gut-deep anger toward my own wife, of all people. 14 years of marriage, 3 kids, a life built together, and I'm suddenly looking at her like she's someone I barely know. I keep trying to wrap my head around how she could do this, how she could cross such a clear line. It all started a few weeks ago. My sister and I have always been close. She's one of the few people in my life I trust implicitly. When we were younger, we'd tell each other everything, like most siblings, I suppose, but as we got older, we kept that bond. So, when she went through a rough patch in her marriage years back, she came to me. She confided in me during one of those long, painful nights when you just need someone to hear you. She'd had an emotional affair. Nothing physical, but it had wrecked her. I remember her sitting across from me, racked with guilt, apologizing through tears, confessing every detail as if she needed to spill it all to find any chance at forgiveness. I listened, I reassured her, and I helped her find a path forward. That confession stayed between us. It was her secret, our secret, and no one else needed to know. Years passed, and she turned her life around. She got sober, went to therapy, and somehow managed to rebuild her marriage. I watched her transform, finding joy again, learning to be vulnerable in a real, healthy way. Her husband never knew about the affair. And honestly, I figured there was no need for him to know. The past was the past. She'd carried her shame and fixed her mistake. It was as much a part of her journey as it was her burden. And I respected that. Fast forward to a couple of weeks ago. We'd had a small family get-together. And maybe I'd had a drink too many. Just enough to feel a little too comfortable. At some point, I remember my sister bringing up how that rough patch was a wake-up call for her. We were reminiscing about how far she'd come, laughing a little, and I let my guard down. I didn't even notice my wife, Lisa, in earshot. To be honest, it didn't occur to me she'd even pick up on what we were talking about. The next morning, Lisa blindsides me. She asks, with that pointed, accusatory tone I've come to recognize all too well, "Did your sister cheat on her husband?" I froze. Every instinct told me to shut it down. So I did. I told her it wasn't her business. That this was something she didn't need to know. I thought that would be the end of it. Maybe a bit of tension, but nothing that couldn't blow over. But that's not how Lisa is. Once she's got her claws into something, she doesn't let go. She kept bringing it up, talking about fairness, justice, the right thing to do, and every time, I told her to just drop it. I even got angry, told her, in no uncertain terms, to mind her own business. I made it crystal clear this was a private matter. That if she really respected my sister and me, she'd let it go. I can still see her expression. That mix of defiance and righteousness that had always been endearing in smaller doses but felt dangerous now. But even then, I didn't think she'd go so far as to actually tell him. I was naive, thinking she'd just drop it if I stayed firm. I never thought for a second she'd pick up the phone and call my sister's husband. Then, a few days later, the fallout hit. My sister's husband found out about everything. He was devastated, blindsided by a betrayal that was years in the past. And I was just stunned. Stunned at how easily Lisa crossed a line that should have been sacred. Stunned by her audacity to justify it. And even more stunned that she couldn't see how profoundly she'd betrayed me. Right now, I can barely look at her. Every time I try to explain the hurt, the betrayal, I see that same self-righteous glint in her eyes. And it's like gasoline on a fire. This wasn't some harmless bit of snooping. This was a fundamental breach of trust. And it feels so much worse because she just doesn't get it. I don't think she ever will. In all my years with Lisa, I've never felt this way. I've never looked at her and thought, maybe we're not right for each other. Maybe I can't live with this. But now, the thought is there, festering, and as much as I want to believe that maybe time will fix this, that maybe I'm overreacting, deep down, I know it's more than that. Home doesn't even feel like home right now. The air's thick with tension, like this invisible wall that we both tiptoe around, trying not to crack. Every room I step into, every glance she gives me, it all feels loaded with things neither of us are willing to say. It's exhausting, the kind of tension that settles in your bones and makes everything feel heavy. Ever since she told my sister's husband, I haven't been able to eat with her, let alone sleep in the same room. I grab my meals out now, avoiding the kitchen because I can't bear the sight of her trying to play the part of the devoted wife. Setting out plates and acting like nothing's wrong. It feels hollow, forced, even like she's only doing it so she can say she tried. And honestly, I'm not about to give her the satisfaction. Not after what she did. Then there's her so-called apologies. They're almost laughable, in a bitter kind of way. She's tried to corner me a few times, insisting she's sorry and that she'd never do anything like this again. That she realizes she overstepped. But the thing is, I can tell those words don't come from understanding. They're just hollow promises, things she thinks I need to hear to move on. When she looks at me, there's no regret in her eyes, no real grasp of the damage she's done. She still thinks she did the right thing. What really kills me is the way she justifies it all. She keeps repeating this same line, that he had a right to know. Like that's supposed to make it all okay. She talks about fairness and honesty, about how marriage shouldn't have secrets. And every time, I just want to scream. Because she's so caught up in her sense of what's right, that she's missing the entire point. It wasn't her place to decide. She wasn't the one who had to deal with the consequences. Who had to pick up the pieces of a relationship she shattered. My sister's life is in turmoil now. And it's because my wife couldn't keep her nose out of it. And for what? Some moral high ground? And maybe, if I'm honest with myself, what hurts the most is the message it sends about our own marriage. Because if she can't understand why this was wrong, what's stopping her from doing it again? What's stopping her from deciding, someday down the line, that another secret is too big to keep? I realize now, painfully, that the trust I had in her is gone. She's shown me that her sense of justice will always come before my boundaries. And I don't know if I can live with that. It feels like there's no safe space left between us. No room for trust when every conversation could become ammunition. The kids have started noticing. They're smart, you know? It's not like you can hide tension this thick from them. They ask questions, innocent but probing, trying to understand why Dad is eating dinner out all the time, or why Mom's eyes are red. I see them watching us, looking for clues, and I can feel the guilt creeping in. I'm their dad. I'm supposed to protect them from this kind of mess. And Lisa keeps reminding me of that, too, every chance she gets, throwing the kids into every argument. She keeps saying we need to stay together for their sake, that a divorce would tear apart their world. But I can't shake the feeling that using them as leverage is just another manipulation. A way to trap me here, to make me ignore what's staring me in the face. The reality that maybe our marriage is just over. The irony of it all is that I never thought I'd be the one contemplating leaving. 14 years, 3 kids, a whole life, it should be unthinkable. But here I am, unable to even stand in the same room as my wife, feeling this toxic mix of anger and betrayal that seems to grow stronger by the day. And I know, deep down, that this is bigger than just one mistake. It's about respect, trust, boundaries, things that, right now, feel irreparably broken, and I don't know if they can ever be fixed. You know, if someone had told me that I'd be standing here, choosing sides between my wife and my sister, I'd have laughed. I mean, what kind of husband would I be if I wasn't on my wife's side? But here I am, and it's not even a choice. Really, because my loyalty to my sister. That's something I can't compromise on. She trusted me with something deeply personal. And now that's been blown apart. And I just can't shake this sense of responsibility. This need to stand by her and somehow make things right. I keep thinking back to that night years ago. The night she called me up. Barely able to get the words out. She was at her lowest point. Trapped in this dark place. And she didn't know how to climb out. She told me about her emotional affair. Every last detail. As if spilling it all would somehow cleanse her of the guilt. And that's the thing. It wasn't just some passing mistake for her. It was a whole crisis. One she carried like a weight around her neck until she felt safe enough to let someone else carry part of it with her. I was that person for her. And in that moment, I vowed to keep her secret. Not because I thought she was right. Not because I agreed with what she'd done. But because that's what family does. We hold each other up. Even when things get ugly. Even when we don't have all the answers. I listened. I offered my support. And I helped her through it. And when she told me she wanted to make things right, I believed her. I saw how hard she worked to rebuild her life. To repair her marriage. And, most importantly, to forgive herself. But Lisa? She couldn't see any of that. She doesn't understand that for my sister. That chapter of her life is over. Resolved. It's not about hiding the past, it's about letting it stay in the past. About respecting the journey my sister went through to get to where she is now. And that's the part that makes me so angry. My wife, the woman I thought understood me better than anyone, bulldozed right through that, trampling over everything I promised to protect. Now my sister's marriage is falling apart. And I'm the one holding her up again. Trying to piece together the damage that my wife unleashed. Her husband. I can't even imagine what he's feeling right now. Betrayed doesn't even begin to cover it. And my sister? I hear the pain in her voice every time she calls. This deep-seated hurt and regret that I thought she'd moved past. It's all been dredged back up because of one reckless, self-righteous act. And the worst part? There's nothing I can say to fix it. My sister needs me now. More than ever. I know that. But I also know that standing by her feels like a betrayal to Lisa. Like I'm making a choice that no husband should have to make. And maybe that's the root of it all. The reason why this betrayal feels so much worse than anything else we've faced in our marriage. Lisa has forced me into this position. Made me choose between my loyalty to her and my loyalty to my sister. And that's not a position I ever thought I'd be in. I'd be lying if I said this wasn't dredging up memories. 2. Times when Lisa's need to be right outweighed everything else. Times when she put her own sense of justice above the people involved. But this time, it's different. This isn't just about being stubborn or opinionated. This is about a sacred trust. A bond that Lisa shattered without a second thought. And now, no matter how hard I try to piece things back together, I can't ignore the voice in my head telling me that maybe this was the breaking point. So here I am, feeling torn between 2 women I love in completely different ways, knowing that one of them crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. My sister's trust in me, my promise to her, that's something I'll never compromise on. And if it means my marriage has to be sacrificed to uphold that trust, then maybe that's the price I'm willing to pay. Because if I let this go, if I turn my back on my sister now, then what kind of brother would I be? What kind of man? And what kind of husband am I if I can't even trust my own wife to respect the boundaries that matter most to me? It's almost surreal, the way everything at home has turned upside down. It's like this shadow hanging over every conversation, every family meal. I can feel it, Lisa can feel it, and, unfortunately, our kids are picking up on it, too. I hate that it's come to this. But there's no pretending that things are fine. I don't even know how to look her in the eye, let alone act like nothing happened. You know, we used to be a pretty happy, normal family, at least I thought we were. Lisa and I had our routines, our little ways of keeping the chaos of life under control, especially with 3 kids in the mix. But now, everything feels out of place. I've been staying out late, grabbing takeout or eating at my sister's place just to avoid dinner at home. I know that can't go on forever, but right now, I don't see another option. It's like I'm physically unable to sit at that table and pretend that what she did was okay. The kids are sharp. They're more perceptive than we often give them credit for. Our oldest, who's just shy of 10, has started asking questions. He's smart enough to know that something's wrong, but still too young to fully understand. He asked me the other night, "Dad, are you and Mom mad at each other?" I tried to brush it off. Told him that sometimes grown-ups just have disagreements. But how long can I keep saying that? How long can we keep pretending that we're just in a rough patch? That it's just a disagreement, and not this gaping wound that's threatening to tear us apart? And Lisa, she's trying. I can see that. She's making the kids' favorite meals, planning family movie nights, even suggesting a family day at the park. Things she wouldn't have gone out of her way to do before. But I can see right through it. It's all so forced, this desperate attempt to paint over the cracks, to make me forget what she did. But every time I look at her, I remember the betrayal, the breach of trust, the fact that she chose her own version of truth over my family's privacy. Lisa's been throwing herself into damage control mode, trying to fix things by being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, but I know she's doing it to try to ease her own guilt. Not because she truly understands what she did wrong. And as hard as she's trying to keep everything together, the more she pushes, the more suffocated I feel. It's like she's suffocating me with this picture-perfect facade, trying to guilt me into letting go, into moving past something I'm not sure I can move past. What really hurts is that, deep down, I know that I should be here, focused on my kids, giving them a sense of security. But every time I come home, it's like walking into a reminder of what happened. There's this invisible barrier between us. And no matter how many times I try to tell myself to just put on a brave face, to let it go for the sake of the family, I just can't do it. And the kids? They're caught in the middle of this mess. Seeing their dad pulling away, their mom trying too hard, and feeling the tension without understanding why it's there. I can't shake this feeling that, if I don't find a way to address this, really address it, then I'm failing them. 2. I don't want them growing up in a house filled with silent resentment and half-hearted forgiveness. I don't want them to think that marriage is just about swallowing your pride and letting go of things that matter. But then again, I also don't want to be the reason they grow up in a broken home. So here I am, torn between being the dad they need and the husband I'm not sure I can be anymore. I wish I could just snap my fingers and make it all go away. But that's not how life works, is it? And until I figure out what comes next, I'm just here, stuck in the in-between, trying to hold myself together for the kids while feeling my marriage crumble around me. I didn't think I was someone who held on to anger. Not like this, anyway. But here I am, weeks later, and every time I think I might be letting it go, it all comes rushing back. It's like this quiet, simmering rage that won't go away. I'm angry at Lisa, obviously, for crossing the line I thought she'd never cross. But I'm also angry at myself. And it's eating at me, making me question everything. How did I not see this side of her before? I keep running through memories of our years together, looking for signs, for anything that might explain how we ended up here. Lisa's always been outspoken. Sure, she has strong opinions about just about everything. But I thought we had this unspoken understanding when it came to things that mattered. Boundaries that even she wouldn't cross. Turns out, I was wrong. And what does that say about me? That I let this happen? That I trusted her so completely? I can't help but feel like I failed my sister. Failed my marriage, and maybe even failed myself. Part of me wonders if I was just naive, too willing to see the good in her, too quick to brush off the red flags because I wanted to believe she'd never betray me like this. And now, here I am, paying the price for it. Then there's the guilt, for as angry as I am, there's this nagging guilt that won't let go. I see Lisa struggling, trying to make things right, and I know she's hurting, too. I know she probably never meant for it to blow up like this. Maybe in her mind, she was doing what she thought was right, but that doesn't change the fact that she broke something between us. Something I don't know how to repair, and every time I think about forgiving her, it feels like I'm betraying myself, like I'm letting her off the hook too easily. I can't just sweep this under the rug, pretend it didn't happen, because the betrayal is still there, raw and unhealed. It's not just about what she did to my sister's marriage, it's what she did to ours. I used to trust her. Completely and without question. I used to believe that we were on the same team. That whatever challenges came our way, we'd face them together. But now I feel like I have to protect myself. Like I can't let my guard down around my own wife. And that's not a feeling you just shake off. But as much as I want to walk away, as much as I fantasize about just packing my bags and starting over somewhere new, there's this part of me that's terrified of what that would mean. 14 years, 3 kids, a whole life built together. Can I really throw that away? I keep picturing our kids, imagining the questions they'd ask, the confusion, the hurt. I'd be tearing apart their world just as much as mine. And I don't know if I can live with that. So, here I am, stuck in this spiral of anger, guilt, and doubt, questioning every decision, every feeling, every instinct. I feel like I'm drifting, lost between the past I thought I knew and a future I can't even imagine. It's a hell of my own making. This constant back and forth between holding on and letting go, between forgiveness and resentment. And the worst part? I don't know which side is winning. Maybe that's the real question I'm wrestling with. Do I even want to find a way back? Or am I just hanging on out of fear, out of habit, out of some sense of obligation to a life I no longer recognize? I don't have the answers, but I know that until I do, I'm trapped here, torn between a love that feels like it's slipping away and a betrayal I don't know how to forgive. And as much as I hate to admit it, I don't know if I'll ever be able to move past this. As angry as I am, sometimes I catch myself wondering what this all looks like from Lisa's side. I mean, she's been saying all along that she thought my sister's husband had a right to know. That she'd want the same if the tables were turned. She's convinced she did the right thing. And as hard as that is for me to accept, I wonder if, in some twisted way, she believes it, believes she was acting on some higher sense of honesty or justice. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that, to Lisa, right and wrong seem to be these rigid, unbending things. If she thinks something is the right thing to do, there's no middle ground. And maybe she felt so certain she was justified that she couldn't see how her actions might affect me, or my sister, or anyone else. It's like she got tunnel vision, focused only on the principle of honesty without considering the fallout. But isn't that the difference between acting with empathy and just being self-righteous? Because to me, if her actions tear someone's life apart, how can that possibly be right? But still, I try to imagine what might have been going through her head. Maybe she thought she'd be helping my sister's husband in the long run, sparing him from a marriage she thought was built on a lie. And it's possible she genuinely didn't think it would blow up the way it did. I think, deep down, she believed she was doing something noble. And maybe that's the hardest part for me to reconcile, that her idea of noble could be so misguided, so oblivious to the real harm it could cause. Then there's the question of our own marriage. In her mind, she sees herself as the one who stands up for what's right, who can't bear to keep secrets, who believes in total honesty no matter the cost. And maybe she's looking at me now and wondering why I don't feel the same way. Why I'm not on board with her idea of truth above all. Maybe she sees my anger as me taking my sister's side over hers, as if it's some kind of betrayal. But that's not what this is about. This is about respecting boundaries, about keeping trust, about understanding that sometimes loyalty to the people we love means not airing every secret. But here's where it gets tricky. In her eyes, I'm just as guilty. She sees me as someone who kept a secret, who enabled what she calls dishonesty by not telling my sister's husband. She thinks I broke some moral code by staying quiet, by honoring my sister's choice to move on from her past. And now that's what I'm wrestling with. Was my silence really that wrong? Should I have told someone? Should I have questioned my sister's decision to keep it private? Or am I just falling victim to Lisa's need to make everything black and white? I want to talk to her, to try and explain my side. But every time I open my mouth, I feel this wall go up between us. She's still defensive, still sees herself as the one in the right, and I'm left feeling like there's no way to bridge the gap between us. I don't know how to explain to her that, in my mind, loyalty isn't about spilling every truth, but about protecting the people you love. And until she understands that, I feel like we're speaking two different languages. What scares me most is the realization that maybe this isn't just about my sister, or even about honesty. Maybe this is about two people with fundamentally different values. I thought we shared the same principles, that we'd always see eye to eye on the things that mattered most. But now I'm not so sure. And if we can't even agree on what loyalty means, on what it means to protect each other and our loved ones, then what else don't we agree on? Maybe this has forced me to see her in a new light, one I'm not sure I can ever unsee. And that thought terrifies me, because if I can't find a way to see things from her perspective, if we can't find some common ground, then where does that leave us? I keep running this endless loop in my head, trying to figure out what to do. One moment, I'm dead set on ending this, convinced that this betrayal, this complete disregard for my family's boundaries, is something I just can't come back from. The next, I think about all the years we've spent together, the good memories, the family we built, and I wonder if I'm just throwing it all away over one mistake. It sounds so simple when people say, forgive and move on, but forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't something you can force. But I also know that, as much as this hurts, this decision isn't just about me. It's about the kids. It's about what kind of example I want to set for them. What I want them to think about relationships, loyalty, and trust. If they see us split over this, will they understand why? Will they look at us and think love isn't enough when things get complicated? And if I stay, will they see their dad as someone who lets go of his values? Who accepts betrayal without consequence? The part of me that wants to stay, that part is afraid. Honestly, it's afraid of what life would look like without Lisa. I don't want to split our lives down the middle. Don't want to go through the painful process of starting over. There's a comfort in the familiar, even if that familiar is now tainted by mistrust. And then there's the other side, the part of me that says, you deserve better than this. The part that's tired of rationalizing, tired of trying to understand, tired of the pain. So here I am, facing this crossroad where neither path looks easy. Neither option feels right. If I stay, I'll be forcing myself to live with a version of Lisa I don't know if I respect anymore. And if I go, I'll be walking away from a life we spent years building, a life I once believed in. And then, maybe the real question is, can Lisa and I rebuild any of this? Can we somehow come together? Not as the people we were, but as two people who've seen each other at our worst and decide to give it one more shot. Can we lay everything on the table, really listen to each other, and decide if there's something left to save? Because if I'm being honest with myself, there's still a part of me that hopes, that wishes we could come out of this stronger. That somehow, this could be a painful chapter that leads to something better. I know one thing for sure, we can't keep going like this. In silence, in this cold war that's tearing our family apart. Either we figure out how to move forward together, or we take the next steps apart. So maybe it's time to sit down with Lisa. For real this time, without the anger, without the walls, and talk about what we're both willing to fight for, if anything at all. Because if we can't find common ground here, then maybe it's time to face the truth. Maybe it's time to let go. As painful as that is. But if there's even a chance that we can fix this, then I owe it to myself, to Lisa, and to the life we've built, to give it one last shot.
AITA for leaving my husband after years of putting his friends and family above me. And finding out he might not even want our baby? You know, if you'd told me 5 years ago that this is where I'd end up, packing up my life, with a baby on the way, leaving the man I thought I'd spend forever with, I'd have laughed in your face. I'd have thought, no, that'll never be me. I found someone solid, someone who gets me, someone who's in it for the long haul. That's how I felt when I first met Evan. He was like this breath of fresh air. He was attentive, you know, thoughtful, the kind of guy who'd bring me flowers just because. And I don't mean store-bought, either. He'd pick wildflowers on his way over if he saw some that reminded him of me. That's the kind of guy the first thought I was marrying. I'd grown up on stories about love. That fairy tale version where you meet someone who lights up your world. Who'd go to the ends of the earth for you. And honestly, for those first couple of years, that's what it felt like. We'd go on these spontaneous road trips. Talk about everything under the sun. Dream big. He'd look at me like I was his whole world. And I thought I'd hit the jackpot. Looking back, I can see it all so clearly now. How I glossed over things. Little signs here and there. But I wanted it to work. So I ignored them. Like how, every now and then, he'd cancel plans last minute because his friends needed him. They're like brothers to me. He'd say, and I didn't question it. It seemed sweet. Even, he was loyal. Someone people could rely on. It was one of the things I admired about him. Honestly, but loyalty's a funny thing. Isn't it? It can go from being admirable to damaging when it's so strong it blocks out everyone else. Still, for the longest time, I thought we had something real. Something solid. I imagined this future with him. Kids and all. Where we'd be each other's rock no matter what. We'd talk late into the night about where we'd raise our family. About all the things we wanted to give our kids. About how we'd always show up for each other. I thought I'd found someone who would always have my back. Someone I could trust no matter what. And yet, here I am, packing up, leaving a note behind. Isn't it strange, how you can go from feeling like someone is your whole world to realizing they're the person you need to leave to save yourself? It's almost hard to believe now. Remembering the good times, I think about those early days. And it's like I'm looking at a movie screen of someone else's life. Because that's not the man I'm with anymore. Or maybe he is, and I was just too caught up in the fantasy to see it. Either way, it's all changed now, and it hurts like hell. It didn't all change overnight. I wish I could say there was some big, obvious moment when I realized he was starting to slip away. That his priorities were shifting. But no, it was more like watching sand slip through my fingers. Little by little, one day, I woke up, looked around, and wondered where my husband had gone. That guy who used to make me feel like I was the most important part of his life. At first, it was small things, just the occasional canceled date night or last-minute change of plans because his friends needed him. He'd call me right before dinner. Hey, babe, can we rain check tonight? Mike's having a rough day, and he really needs to talk it out. Or I'd find out we couldn't go on that weekend trip we planned because suddenly, one of his friends had a video game tournament or some other, urgent, get-together that he had to be there for. It's just this one time. He'd say, they're like brothers to me. And I'd let it slide. Again and again. But you know what they say, one time becomes two. Two becomes three. And pretty soon it wasn't just once in a while. It was all the time. I'd watch him light up when he got a call from one of his buddies. Like he'd been waiting for an excuse to leave. I felt like a third wheel in my own marriage, watching him pour his energy into everyone but me. Then there were the group hangouts. Don't get me wrong, I liked his friends. At least at first. They were fun and easygoing. But there were always moments when I felt like an outsider. Like they all had this inside joke. This shared history I could never fully be part of. Evan would joke around with them, laugh until his face turned red. And it was like he was a different person. Someone I didn't quite know. And as much as I wanted to be part of that world, it became clear that they weren't interested in making space for me in it. They wanted Evan, just Evan, and I was the one they had to tolerate because I came with him. I'd sit there, smiling politely, listening to stories I'd heard a dozen times, wondering why I felt so lonely, and I started to resent it. All of it, not because I wanted him to abandon his friends, but because I wanted to feel like his partner, not just an accessory he brought along. But every time I tried to bring it up, to say that maybe he needed to find a balance, he'd brush it off. You know they mean a lot to me. He'd say, it's not a big deal. You're overthinking it. Maybe I was. I told myself that he loved me, that he'd make time for us when it mattered. But over time, I realized that if I kept waiting for him to put me first, I'd be waiting forever. It's a hard thing to accept, that you're not a priority to the person you thought you'd share your life with. It doesn't hit you all at once. It seeps in slowly, like water through a crack, until one day you're standing there, soaked and shivering, wondering how you got there. So yeah, I ignored a lot of red flags. And I made excuses. I told myself that every relationship has its rough patches, that every couple has things they disagree on. But deep down, I think I knew that, no matter what I did, I'd never be first in his life. I just didn't want to believe it. And looking back now, that's what hurts the most, knowing I kept quiet, hoping he'd see me, but realizing he never did. Or if he did, he just didn't care enough to change. It started out so small. You'd barely notice it, just a canceled dinner here, a missed movie night there. It's just one night, he'd say, Mike's going through something, and he really needs me. I wanted to be the understanding partner, the one who didn't keep score, so I brushed it off. He'd come back, and everything would feel fine, at least for a while. But just one night turned into just one weekend, and eventually turned into him being out more nights than he was home. I remember this one night so clearly. I had planned a whole evening for us, cooked his favorite dinner, set up the backyard with string lights. Just a quiet night for the two of us. I'd barely gotten the table set when he called. Hey, babe, I'm so sorry, but the guys just invited me to watch the game. I'll be home later, okay? He didn't even ask, just assumed I'd understand. And you know what? I let him. I said, okay, have fun, and I sat there alone, picking at the meal I'd made for us. Little by little, I started to realize that he'd never really chosen me. Sure, we lived together, shared a bed, and wore rings, but when it came down to it, his friends were his real commitment. I could see it in the way he'd drop everything for them. The way he'd light up when they called. Even the way he'd rearrange his plans to fit theirs. I'd sit there feeling like I was the last person in line. And I hated that feeling. And it wasn't just his friends. His mom was a whole other level of priority. Don't get me wrong, I know family's important, but his mom? She made it clear from day one that she didn't think I was good enough for him. The snide comments, the constant criticisms. Are you really going to wear that? Or, isn't Evan too busy to do all that housework? And he'd just sit there, saying nothing, or worse, laughing it off as if it were some harmless joke. I felt invisible, like my feelings didn't matter in the slightest. The worst part was that he never defended me. Not once. Every time she'd make a dig, I'd look at him, hoping he'd say something, but he'd just smile, shrug, or change the subject, and that cut deeper than anything his mother could say. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that once we settled down, he'd prioritize our relationship more. But with every year that passed, the truth became harder to ignore. His friends came first, his mother came first, everyone came first, and I was just there, waiting for my turn, which never seemed to come. I'd tell him, gently at first, that I felt left out, that it hurt when he didn't include me or when he'd cancel plans last minute. And every time, he'd say, you're overreacting, they're like family to me. You know that, and the way he'd say it, like I should feel bad for even asking him to consider my feelings. Like I was the one being unreasonable. It was exhausting, so I stopped bringing it up. I bottled it all up and told myself I could live with it. But here's the thing about bottling things up, eventually, the bottle cracks. You can only feel invisible for so long before it starts to break you down. And I realized, slowly, painfully, that I was never going to be his first priority. He wasn't going to wake up one day and suddenly see me. I was always going to be second, or maybe third, in line. Finding out I was pregnant should have been one of those moments that brings a couple closer. Right? I had this whole image in my head, Evan and me sitting together. Maybe holding hands, him with that look of pure joy on his face, saying how excited he was to become a dad. It was supposed to be this turning point, something that would make him see what really mattered, make him see us. I thought that, maybe with a baby on the way, he'd finally step up, but when I told him, it wasn't what I'd imagined at all. I remember how his face fell, the way he just sat there, Quiet, looking like he was processing some terrible news. No joy, no excitement, just a blank, almost panicked expression, and when he finally spoke, it wasn't anything I wanted to hear. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this," he said, like he was talking about a weekend trip he didn't want to go on. My stomach dropped. I could barely process his words. He went on about how he wasn't convinced it was the right time, and how he felt pressured by all the changes happening. And then, the cherry on top, he told me he'd talked it over with his friends. And they agreed he was just being honest. Imagine that. He needed his friends to validate his feelings about our child, our future. It was like I was invisible in that conversation. Like my opinion, my feelings, didn't matter at all. I felt this overwhelming wave of sadness, mixed with anger. Here I was, carrying his child, thinking we were about to embark on this incredible journey together. And he was sitting there, looking at me like I was the one burdening him. It hit me then, like a punch to the gut. If he couldn't put me first now, if he couldn't be there for me in this moment, what kind of father was he going to be? After that, things only got worse. I tried to give him space, thinking maybe he just needed time to process, to come to terms with it. But every time we talked about the baby, it was like he was carrying this heavy weight, something he was being forced to drag around. He'd dodge any conversations about baby names or future plans, always saying, "Let's not rush it, we have time." But the way he avoided it all just made me feel more alone. The real breaking point, though, was when I had a small health scare. Nothing too serious, but enough to make me nervous. I texted him, asking him to come with me to the doctor. I needed him, needed some reassurance, someone by my side. And you know what he said? "I can't right now, I'm with the guys. Call me when you're done." Just like that, like my health, the baby, our future, it was all secondary to whatever hangout he was at with his friends. I sat there in that waiting room, alone, with this huge knot in my chest. I realized then that I couldn't rely on him. Not now, not ever. If he couldn't be there for me when I was scared, if he couldn't show up when it mattered most, then what kind of partner was he really? What kind of father would he be? I'd been holding on, hoping, waiting for him to show me that he cared, that I mattered, but he'd shown me, over and over, where his priorities were, and I was nowhere near the top. It wasn't just a one-time thing, it was a pattern, a painful, unchanging truth I had to face. And that's when I knew, for the sake of my baby, for the sake of my own self-worth, I had to stop waiting for him to change. He wasn't going to. He'd made his choice, over and over, and now I was making mine. After that doctor's visit, I felt a shift inside me. It was like the fog had finally cleared, and I could see everything for what it was: my marriage, my future, Evan's role in my life, or rather, the lack of it. I'd spent years waiting, hoping he'd see me, hoping he'd put me first. But I knew in my heart that if I kept waiting, I'd be waiting forever. That night, I didn't say much to him. I didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't even try to tell him what I was feeling. What was the point? I'd tried 1,000 times before, and he'd always brushed it off, always treated my needs as if they were inconveniences. And I didn't want to beg for someone's attention, especially not my husband's. I deserved more than that. So, I started making plans, silently, meticulously, and honestly, with a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't easy. Every memory we shared, every good moment we'd had, they all weighed on me. I'd be packing my things and come across some picture or old card from when we were dating, and I'd feel that familiar pang of doubt. Had I really tried hard enough? Was I giving up too soon? But then I'd think about that waiting room, about him choosing his friends over me, about him sitting there, expressionless, when I told him about the baby, and the doubt would fade, replaced by a steely resolve that I'd never felt before. I reached out to a lawyer, just to understand my options, and every conversation, every bit of paperwork, made it all feel more real. This was happening. I was taking back control of my life, one decision at a time. And you know what? I started to feel stronger. Bit by bit, I realized I didn't need Evan to make me whole. I'd just forgotten that along the way. I was doing this for me, for my baby, for the life I deserved. The hardest part was thinking about the future, facing the reality of raising a child on my own. But even then, I had this strange sense of peace. I knew that, even though I was stepping into the unknown, I was doing it on my own terms. I wasn't going to let my child grow up in an environment where they were anything less than a priority. They deserved a parent who would be there, who would put them first. And if that meant it was just going to be me, then so be it. I found myself feeling grateful. Oddly enough, grateful to my friend who opened her door to me, to the lawyer who talked me through the complicated mess of paperwork, to the little moments of strength I found within myself each day. I even started feeling grateful to Evan, in a strange way, for showing me, clearly and unmistakably, who he really was. If he hadn't, I might still be sitting there, hoping, waiting for him to become the man I'd once thought he was. So I packed up what mattered, left behind what didn't, and took one last look at the life I was leaving. It was bittersweet, sure, but there was a freedom in it, too. I was no longer tethered to someone who saw me as an afterthought. I was choosing myself, choosing my baby, choosing a future where I was valued. And that's when it truly sank in. I wasn't walking away from my life. I was walking towards something better. Leaving wasn't some grand moment. There was no dramatic speech, no slamming doors or last words. It was quiet, almost peaceful. I waited until Evan was out, most likely with his friends, because I knew he wouldn't understand. And honestly, I didn't want to explain myself again. I'd spent years trying to make him see me, to get him to care, and I was done with that. This goodbye wasn't for him, it was for me. I packed up the things I needed, took one last look around, and felt this overwhelming sense of calm. It was like shedding an old, worn-out skin. Everything I was leaving behind, the life we built, the plans we made, felt like it belonged to someone else. Someone who had once been hopeful, maybe even a little naive, but that wasn't me anymore. I'd grown, and I wasn't going to let anyone hold me back from the life I deserved. When I left, I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I felt this strange sense of relief, like a weight had lifted off my shoulders. I didn't even look back as I walked out the door. I was done carrying the burden of a relationship where I was always second best, where my needs were never truly heard. It felt like I was finally giving myself permission to be happy, to be free. I went straight to my friend's place, and she welcomed me with open arms. No questions asked. She just hugged me and said, "I'm proud of you." That was all I needed to hear. For the first time in a long time, I felt validated, like someone finally saw the strength it took for me to make this decision. I realized then that I had a support system, people who genuinely cared, people who wanted me to succeed, and that meant the world to me. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the future. It was scary, of course, stepping into the unknown with a baby on the way. I had no idea what was ahead, but I felt a strange sense of peace knowing that whatever came, I was facing it on my terms. I was making choices for myself, for my child, and there was something so powerful in that. I thought about the life I wanted to create, about the kind of parent I wanted to be. I wanted my child to grow up in a home filled with love, respect, and understanding, where they would never feel like they came second to anyone or anything. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I felt ready. I was no longer waiting for someone else to choose me or validate me. I was doing that for myself. The next morning, I started making real plans. I reached out to my lawyer, found a therapist, and even signed up for a prenatal yoga class to take care of myself and my growing baby. Every little step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I'd lost along the way. I was building a new life, one that felt solid and real, and it was all mine. And for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of excitement, a spark of hope. This was my fresh start, my chance to create the kind of life I'd always dreamed of. It was terrifying, yes, but it was also exhilarating. I had left behind everything that didn't serve me, and in its place, I was creating a future filled with possibilities. This wasn't the life I had planned, but it was the one I was choosing, a life where I came first, where my child came first, and where we would never have to fight for someone's love or attention. This was the beginning of something beautiful, and I was ready to embrace it. Settling into my new life wasn't instant, but bit by bit, I started to feel more like myself, or maybe even like someone better, someone stronger. There were a lot of quiet mornings where I'd wake up, look around, and feel the unfamiliarity of everything. It felt strange, not having Evan there, not hearing his keys jingle at odd hours, or finding him halfway out the door for yet another plan with his friends. But you know what? That quiet, that solitude, started to feel like a gift. I'd pour myself a cup of tea and just sit, listening to the hum of a peaceful morning. No stress, no wondering if he'd even ask me how my day was or make a plan with just the two of us. It was just me and this growing life inside me, and that felt right. For once, there was no one telling me what to prioritize, what mattered more. It was up to me, and I was learning to trust myself in a way I hadn't in years. I threw myself into preparing for the baby. Not in some idealistic, picture-perfect way, but in a practical, excited way. I'd find myself at stores, picking up tiny clothes and imagining my child in them. I painted the nursery with a calm, soft color, feeling each brushstroke like a promise to this little person who would soon be my world. Every step was a reminder that I was building this life on my own terms, with my own choices, and that filled me with a quiet pride. My friend, the one who had taken me in, was there every step of the way. She'd sit with me, sometimes helping, sometimes just laughing with me about the absurdity of baby gear options. Did I really need a special seat just to bathe a baby? She reminded me that I wasn't alone, even when it felt that way. And the more we talked, the more I realized that I wasn't the same person I'd been with Evan. I was discovering my voice again, my confidence. I'd let so much of that slip away over the years, bending over backward to make our relationship work. Then there were the nights when doubt crept in, whispering fears and uncertainties. Could I really do this on my own? Would I be enough for my child? What if I made mistakes? Or missed things? Those thoughts hit me like waves, especially late at night when everything felt magnified. But each time, I'd remind myself of all I'd already done. I'd survived heartbreak, learned to stand up for myself, made decisions I never thought I'd have the courage to make. I could handle this. I would handle this. It felt good, rediscovering the things I loved, like reading. I'd always loved getting lost in a book. And suddenly, I had time for it again. And cooking. I cooked meals just for myself. Meals that didn't have to cater to someone else's tastes or schedule. I was reconnecting with the parts of me that had been quiet for too long. And it felt like meeting an old friend. One day, I looked at myself in the mirror and hardly recognized the woman staring back. She looked stronger, more sure of herself. I smiled, realizing I was proud of her. Proud of me. This new life wasn't what I'd imagined all those years ago. But it was good, honest, and real. I was living with intention. Not just floating along, hoping for someone to notice me. The journey was far from over. There were still tough days. And I knew there'd be more ahead. But for the first time in a long time, I felt grounded. I had a purpose beyond just existing in someone else's life. This was my story, and I was writing it every day, one choice at a time. And with each decision, I was building a future where my child and I could thrive. Free from the shadows of someone else's priorities. I was ready for whatever came next. I was no longer afraid of being on my own, of walking forward without Evan, of building a life where my happiness and my child's well-being were at the heart of everything. The last step was finally letting go of the past and truly embracing the future I was building. That meant I had to confront some lingering feelings, the anger, the resentment, even the love I'd once felt for Evan. Moving on didn't mean pretending none of it happened. It meant finding peace with the parts that were beautiful and the parts that hurt. And accepting that it was all part of the person I'd become. One evening, I found myself sifting through a box of old memories, photos of Evan and me. Tickets from our first date. A faded anniversary card where he'd written things that felt true once. For a moment, I felt that familiar ache. A small sense of loss for what could have been. But as I looked at those mementos, I realized that those were pieces of a story that no longer defined me. They were just memories, echoes of a chapter I had closed. I decided it was time to let it go. Literally and figuratively, I threw away what didn't serve me, what only reminded me of hurt, and kept only a few small reminders of what I'd learned and grown through. It was freeing, like shedding an old skin. I wasn't erasing Evan from my life. I was simply choosing not to carry the weight of that story with me anymore. From then on, everything I did felt lighter, like I'd released the last strings tying me to a version of myself that no longer existed. I began thinking about the future in a different way. My baby wasn't just coming into a new world, we were building that world together. I started looking at parenting classes, connecting with other soon-to-be single mothers, and forming a support system that I could trust. That could trust me. I found strength in my family, my friends, and, most of all, in myself. My friend who took me in, my uncle who helped me sort out the logistics, even my mom who, despite our past differences, showed up to help me paint the nursery. I had people who genuinely cared, and it made me realize how lucky I was. I wasn't alone. I was surrounded by people who reminded me that I could do this. That I could give my child the love, stability, and happiness they deserved. There were still moments where doubt crept in, where I'd catch myself wondering if Evan would change, if he'd suddenly become the partner I'd always needed him to be. But every time, I reminded myself of how much I'd already grown. I didn't need him to change anymore. I didn't need him at all. My life, my happiness, my future, they weren't dependent on anyone else. The final act of letting go came one morning when I received a text from Evan. He said he was sorry, that he'd had a lot of time to think, that he wanted to be there for me and the baby. I read the message over a few times, and surprisingly, I didn't feel much at all. I didn't feel tempted or relieved or hopeful. I felt indifferent. He was part of my past, a lesson I'd learned, a chapter I'd already closed. I didn't need his apology to move forward. I was already doing it. So I replied, thanking him for reaching out, and told him I hoped he found the clarity he needed. But as for me, I was moving on, with or without him, and I knew in that moment that I was ready for whatever lay ahead. I was stepping into a new chapter, one I'd chosen, one I'd built with my own strength, my own resilience, and my own love for this little life growing inside me. It was the start of something beautiful, something I had created for myself, for my child, and it was everything I needed. Starting over, truly starting over, felt both terrifying and exhilarating. In the days that followed, I focused on the little things, the day-to-day moments that built this new life I was creating. There were early morning walks, where the cool air felt like a promise of fresh beginnings, and the quiet afternoons spent reading books about motherhood, and what it meant to raise a child with love and strength. I poured myself into preparing for my child. I imagined our future, planning for the kind of home I wanted to create, a home filled with warmth, laughter, and security. I took time setting up the nursery, filling it with gentle colors and soft blankets, each detail a piece of love I could offer, a part of me that my child would come to know. Along the way, I realized I'd become my own source of strength. I found a sense of peace in knowing that I could depend on myself, that I didn't need anyone's approval, and that I was more than enough for my baby. I found myself smiling at the woman I was becoming, someone who wasn't defined by past relationships or the pain they'd brought. I was someone who had made it through the fire and emerged stronger. The support of the people who truly cared, my friends, family, even new friends from the prenatal group I joined, reminded me that I was part of a community that valued me. One night, a friend from my prenatal class invited me over for dinner. We shared stories about our own journeys, laughed over our anxieties, and cried about our hopes for our children. It hit me then that I wasn't just gaining independence, I was also building connections that would last. Friendships that added richness and warmth to my life. As my due date approached, I felt a surge of anticipation. I wasn't just preparing to bring a baby into the world, I was preparing to step into motherhood with open arms. ready to be the kind of parent my child could rely on and look up to. I realized that everything I'd been through, all the pain and heartbreak, had led me to this moment, a moment where I knew exactly who I was and what I could offer. Then, one night, while folding tiny clothes and organizing the baby's things, it dawned on me just how full my life had become. No, it wasn't the life I'd initially planned, but in some ways, it was better, richer, more meaningful. I had a purpose now, a reason to wake up every morning and push forward. I was creating a life, not just for myself, but for my child, and that gave me a sense of hope and joy I hadn't felt in years. I was ready, truly ready, for whatever the future held. I'd learned to embrace the unknown, to find comfort in the strength I built within myself, and to trust that, no matter what, I was capable of creating a beautiful life for both me and my child. This was my fresh start, my new beginning, and as I stood in that nursery, looking around at everything I built, I felt a quiet happiness settle over me. I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Surrounded by love, resilience, and hope, my heart felt light, filled with the certainty that this journey, this life, was mine, and I was ready to live it fully, one beautiful day at a time.